I'm so excited to be sitting down with Emily O'Hara, the Senior Director of Guest Experience at the Detroit Zoological Society, a nonprofit organization that operates both the Detroit Zoo and Belle Isle Nature Center. Emily, welcome to See Eye to Eye.
Thank you for having me.
I've been so excited about this podcast interview because I may have mentioned on the podcast before, but I actually have a background in zoology. My major, the thing I studied at university, was zoology. For a long time in my life, I was, on the career path of animal sciences. I also lived like right next to Chester Zoo, which is one of the biggest zoos in the United Kingdom. So much so that I could hear the sea lions barking in the morning. And so I've always been obsessed with zoos and, loved anything to do with animals. So,
That's awesome. I was wondering, what is your favorite animal?
oh, ants. I love ants. Yeah. So I studied rock ants at university. I spent a long time looking at ants on a table and tracking them with a webcam. It's a whole thing. I'm not sure if it was useful science, but it was definitely science. So yeah, anything to do with ants, I'm always interested in.
So prior to working for the Detroit Zoological Society, I was at the Museum of Science in Boston, where we had a leafcutter ant exhibit that I worked on. And then prior to that, I was at the Montshire Museum of Science, which is up in Vermont, and also had leafcutter ants there that I
Yeah.
worked with.
Fascinating. I could watch them for hours. What's your favorite animal?
Ooh, so traditionally, I say my favorite animal is a crested screamer, which is a bird, a
Sure.
very unique looking bird. They used to live at the Detroit Zoo, but the pair that lived here actually moved down to sunny Florida so that they could be outdoors year round, much better suited for their environment, their needs. So now I say of the residents who live at the Detroit Zoo, uh, Scarlet ibis is currently my favorite. Another bird that lives in our free fly aviary.
Amazing. Watch the search volume on Google Trends of crested screamers popping up after this. Uh,
I do suggest you also go and watch a YouTube video of their vocalization. They're a
uh,
fun bird.
I'm definitely going to do this after this interview. So many arts and cultural organizations don't have a dedicated director of guest experiences. Tell us more about what your role entails.
So really it's looking at the guest experience, no matter whether you're here as a general daytime admission guest or here for a special event, maybe one of our evening hours, or even for a wedding. We want to ensure that you are having a great experience, that you are able to access the amenities that you need, that you're able to enjoy time with the family members or friends who you're visiting with, and ultimately that we're able to connect you to our mission.
And so, why is it important to have someone championing this work in an organization?
I'll say, especially at cultural organizations, um, the guest experience is essential because oftentimes we have mission messages that we're also trying to share. So for the Detroit Zoological Society, we want to connect people, animals, and the natural world. And oftentimes we're talking about conservation stories or work that we're doing out, around the world, or even work with the animals who live either at the zoo or at the nature center. And you can't get to those messages if you haven't met your basic needs of your guest.
Mm.
It's one of the, in some sense, founding principles of why schools do free breakfast or free lunch, to make sure that their learners are able to focus on what they want them to focus on. So we have a similar, philosophy in that we want to ensure that the guests who come feel welcome, but also are able to have those basic needs met. So do you know what you're going to eat for lunch that day? You've got a kiddo who all of a sudden has to go to the bathroom now. Can you find those amenities and have them be accessible to you? We also want to make sure, you're having a good time with the group that you came with. The highest reported reason why guests are coming to our facilities are to spend time with other people. And we want to make sure that you can have that quality time and be building those memories together as well.
And it seems like your role is more common exhibit-based organizations, things like zoos, museums, aquariums, science centers, but it's not as common maybe in performance-based institutions. And there are definitely exceptions to that rule that we've talked about on the podcast. But do you have any thought why that might be?
Yeah, so for an exhibit-based organization, we definitely uh, we're building your experience. So every time someone is coming through the door, we're kind of curating what it is based on how we've set up the journey to go. I do wonder if performance-based institutions, because the thing you're doing is kind of this external party is coming in and performing, and you're sitting there and taking it in. Um, there's the crafting of that experience kind of happens in a slightly different format, and so I'm wondering if that is kind of that split that you're seeing when you're looking across cultural organizations.
Yeah, definitely. It feels like visiting an exhibit-based organization, the experience is the whole thing. Whereas like an
Mhm.
performance-based institution, often the thought is that the experience you're getting is just the bit where the curtain goes up. And maybe we need to rethink that a little.
Yeah, and in some sense, there are certain points in the interaction where it is very much the same. We're ticket taking, right? Trying to get folks in through the doors. We want to ensure that the ticket buying process was clear. You know what you're expecting. We do have amenities, right? Restrooms, vending of some sort, whether it's restaurants or other dining organization or dining offerings. And then ultimately, can you get back to your car or back to public transit? How are you getting home afterwards? So ensuring that we're covering those things. I think we definitely still have a lot of overlaps with each other.
Yeah, it feels like the experience at an exhibit-based organization it is almost like continuous, straight from when you get in, or even before you get into the museum or the zoo, right until when you leave. Like, what's the first moment and last moment you want a visitor to experience at the Detroit Zoo?
So ideally, we want you to come in and say, "Whoa, we're really excited to enter this place." We did go through rebranding this last year, and one of the places that we tried to focus some of our rebranding efforts, knowing that we couldn't rebrand everything all at the same time, just resource constraints, um, not have enough money or time to do that, is we focused on our main entry. So we wanted to make sure that we had light pole banners and big signage, and we have a giant photo op that you can get a family photo with as you're walking up to our main admission gates, so that you have that excitement, that new energy already building on your way into the zoo.
Yeah, those kind of like guest activation centers, right? Is that what you call them for photo opportunities?
Yeah, definitely photo opportunities, and then other places where you can interact in a way. One of our key elements on our Detroit Zoo campus is Rackham Fountain, which is a fountain that has been on site for our entire 95-year history, and we have families who come and get photos with it every year. They have generational photos, where they can go back and say, "Oh, this was my grandparents with my parents, and now this is our family with their grandkids." And it's a wonderful thing to see that build and continue as folks come back again and again.
Amazing. And like, what do you want guests to feel when they leave the zoo? What's like the primary feeling you're aiming for?
I'm hoping joy.
Yeah.
We really want to make sure that you had a joyous day. It is a tricky thing in that the end of the day can be exhausting, right? You've got kids who are tired, you're tired. Depending on the weather that day, it might have been hot, it might have been really cold. You might have a hike to get back to your car because we do have big parking lots. When we have 10,000 visitors coming in a day, you might not be parked right by the exit. So we want to make sure to make that exit as smooth as we can, knowing that there's still challenges to overcome as part of that. So we want to make sure that, again, the restrooms on your way out, it's just one of those little things. We're always working with our janitorial team to ensure at the end of the day, we're not shutting down restrooms on people's exit route so that they can hit that bathroom before they get in the van to head home. We want to make sure that those amenities are there on the way out. In our gift shop, right before the exit, we have bottled water, or well, we have cans of water that you can buy, or other beverages or little snacks. Again, you're hitting the road. We want to make sure that you can have those amenities to take with you, so that you can be talking about the awesome time that you had at the zoo rather than complaining about being tired, or I have to go to the bathroom, or I'm hungry or thirsty.
It feels like you really thought about like hospitality such in such a deep way, and there's so many aspects of that visitor experience that you've thought about, in their entire journey through the zoo and after. How do you prioritize which areas to focus on? Like, do you conduct any focus groups or audience behavior research?
So we have a variety of methods. So we're always collecting visitor feedback. So we send experience surveys after guests come to visit, and we do that for both our daytime guests as well as for events. So we do event visitation surveys as well, because sometimes things can overlap,
Mm.
especially when we're talking about amenities or other things. This last year, we were able to bring in a group to do a specialized accessibility survey as well. And that has really helped because most of, especially if you're talking a zoo, we've been around for a long time. So we have infrastructure that, you know, has been potentially grandfathered in, but there are better practices that we can institute. So we're going back through that and prioritizing, what what reaches, more guests. Um, what are things that we can make changes on that can impact across the board? I mean, the great thing about accessibility is that one accessible change that may be targeted for a certain group or individual helps across the board. I know
Mhm.
curb cuts are always used as, the standard example of curb cuts help strollers, curb cuts help, people who use wheelchairs, curb cuts help if you have a dolly and you're just trying to move stuff, across an area. So we want to be prioritizing those things that can really help across the board. And then there's also just resource limitations. So making sure, as you alluded to, we can't do everything all at once,
Mhm.
but we're really trying to ensure that we're hitting the things that are the biggest pain points first, so that those aren't lingering. We always want to make sure that we're acting on those things to the best of our ability, so that we can get to the things that will really enhance the guest experience. Right? Some of those fun, whimsy, the things that we can really touch on the guest experience. Once you get past the basics of what the limitations are.
Yeah, I mean the fun and whimsy sort of side of stuff is obviously the bit that people maybe focus on, right? But a lot of the basic, like you said, like the taking care of people's basic needs has to come first. I can imagine it'd be quite easy to like go for the shiny thing, like go for a new photo activation or guest activation bit where, whereas what you actually need to do is do all the sort of base work that you've done first.
Oh yeah, and one of the other things that we do is regular walks with our team and across the organization. So I do a weekly walk with our head of facilities, um, just to make sure that he and I are on the same page about, you know, how are we prioritizing repairs? How are we prioritizing upgrades to different areas, particularly, again, our restrooms, our sidewalks, our fencing, so that we are in alignment with what we want to tackle next.
Have you ever had any really surprising, also sort of like counterintuitive things you've learned through your either your walkthroughs or your research? Like any light bulb moments?
One of the things that has stuck with me for years now is more from market research, is the idea of accessible institutions from a financial perspective, um, and the idea that just because a certain group of people isn't coming to your institution, it doesn't mean they can't afford to come, because you might make it free, but if you're not welcoming to them, if they don't feel like it's a place that they belong, they're still not going to come. Like,
Mm.
all the free tickets in the world aren't going to make somebody come to your institution if they don't feel like it's meant for them. So that is also something that we really strive to ensure um, that we're conveying through, our marketing efforts, through ensuring that when we have arranged, a lot of different visitors who come visit our campuses, that we have amenities available that they can feel comfortable and that they can know they belong here. Um, yeah, it's always stuck with me because I think it's a default when folks say, "Oh, such and such are not coming to our campuses." Oftentimes, the default is, "Well, just give them free tickets and they'll
Yeah.
come," um, and that doesn't solve it. It doesn't
I
fix the problem.
I think there's like a parallel there. We've often talked when we're talking about diversity, inclusion, and accessibility of having the door unlocked versus having the door open. Like sure, people can, go and open the door if they want to, but by truly welcoming people by opening the door and inviting them in, wholeheartedly, then it makes such a huge difference, I think.
Yeah. I can share that we encountered that in the last year. Last year, we had a couple of sensory friendly evenings. And again, it was an effort to say, we want to be more welcoming, to guests who have sensory sensitivities or sensory needs. And, for years, we've worked with the Culture City program. We've been training up our staff. In our minds, we were working toward that. Well, so we had some sensory friendly hours, and it was like from 3 to 7, 3 times last year, where we advertised, and we're hoping to have folks come in. And I'm really glad that we listened to people who either came or people who didn't come that said, you know what, dinner time's not the best time, right? We have routines. We need to stick to those routines. Um, so that didn't work for them. Also knowing, well, these 3 random dates, there's no consistency. I can't build a schedule around that, right? How can I do better on that direction? And so what we ended up doing was we just shifted our model and said this year we shifted to the second Monday of every month from opening to noon are sensory friendly hours. And that way our families who we're working with can plan, months ahead of time, consistently see what works for their schedule. It worked better for them, as far as time of day, morning time, kind of that mid-morning, right? You kind of can do something that maybe is out of the norm a little bit. And from our perspective, we were able to then also shift our field trip scheduling. We limited how many field trips we were having come in those mornings to ensure that it's still, a pleasant experience for guests who are coming, who want, to have a quieter, less chaotic experience. We could pre-plan that on our end too. But that was just one example of where we had an idea of, oh, we want to help this group of guests who haven't been coming. And we had to make adjustments. We had to really listen and find out, how can we continue to improve on opening that door and having it be open rather than just unlocked. I like that.
Yeah, for sure. Out of interest, what other accommodations do you make for sensory friendly audiences?
So our main thing is we can make adjustments to some of our attractions around the campus. When you enter the zoo, right up at the front, the Poke Penguin Conservation Center is the spectacular 2-story building that houses 5 different species of penguins. And as part of that experience, when you walk in, we have a ramp that you start in South America, and then you go down the ramp and you cross Drake's Passage to go toward Antarctica. And when you're on Drake's Passage, there is projection all around you. It is sunny. We will see shanty playing in the background, under the blue skies, but then it turns to a storm. And so depending on where you are in the cycle, there can be water spray. The whole room feels like it's kind of moving. It can be loud. So for our sensory sensitivity mornings, we have the lights partially up in that ramp, and then we keep it on daytime the whole time. So you still get the nice experience without some of the unpredictability of that. Also, we have a 4D theater on our campus. And so we can run that without all the effects. So you won't have the air blowing in your face or the poker, behind you. And we can do our lights partially up during that show as well. Those are the kinds of modifications that we're making to our on-campus, to our on-campus amenities during those sensory sensitivity mornings.
Amazing. That penguin exhibition sounds phenomenal. Like I've never ever seen someone leave a penguin exhibition unhappy. They're such like joyful animals, like just watching them like on the glass, like watching them dive through and sort of it looks like they're playing. I don't know if they are, but it looks like they're playing.
Yeah, and the great thing I will say with the 5 different species is they kind of hang out in different areas. They have different habits. The king penguins love, we have like a snow machine ice maker. They will stand under it and have little peaks of snow just falling over them. The chinstrap penguins are almost always swimming around in the water. They're super active. And then the macaroni and rockhopper penguins are often near that kind of South American glass. We're going into breeding season soon, so they're going to be moving rocks around. They use rocks to build their nests and kind of present rocks to each other. And so soon that habitat's going to be full of all kinds of rocks that the penguins can take and manipulate and move around to their nesting areas.
Oh my goodness, magical. I love that so much. You mentioned before the rebrand, and you served on the organization's core team for new brand development. Can you walk us through some of the elements that were designed to make the guest experience even better with this rebrand?
Yeah, so with the rebrand, it really was about shifting the Detroit Zoological Society and the Detroit Zoo to ensure that we had things that were digitally friendly. Some of our previous logos weren't quite as scalable, didn't work in the digital space as well. But then when you're on campus, we wanted to make sure that, again, it was welcoming, friendly, really conveyed the feeling and the spirit that we wanted to get across. So some of the choices that we made, we also use the new logo as containers. So our new logo has the O's of the zoo. You can see it on my or well, I guess auditorily folks can't see it, but if you look it up, the O's of the zoo act as these containers that we can also have animals walk through. We use video superimposed behind it. We'll also have animals or people kind of popping out of them and breaking kind of the shape a little bit as well to really look like they're integrated with the logo. And that was a way for us to highlight different animals who live at the zoo or the nature center, to highlight conservation efforts that we have, to highlight that people are essential as well. So you'll see people used in those O's. And then the other big part of the rebrand was the color palette. We went through and really wanted bright, saturated colors that worked together, again, in a fun way. And we've really rolled that out across our campus. And in our planning, we've been working toward, we painted some roofs last year, thinking about how that integrates into the finishes of our built environment as well, so that it isn't always just in signage or, just in digital formats, but how can we then integrate it into our full campus plan?
So, how do you use data to measure the impact of hospitality initiatives? Are there key metrics or visitor behaviors that you track?
Yes. So I mentioned that we do guest experience feedback surveys. And, you know, as we're going through it, we try to keep our question set fairly similar year after year. We've been tracking these data over a decade now. We've had kind of a similar set of questions. We did last, or a few years ago, we shifted to the model of this is one of those fair, poor, good, excellent, and outstanding.
Got
So adding in the outstanding level there. So as part of our strategic planning initiatives, we do have that kind of baseline guest experience question as a KPI. So we are tracking that percentage year after year. Um, but we have other questions on the survey that we are also paying attention to. They're not kind of our leading KPI that we as an organization are tracking, but especially for our team, we want to be tracking across the board. Likelihood to recommend, we definitely look at very closely. And then for us as a zoo, we have very specific questions around conservation messaging, animal visibility, and then similar, kind of across other boards, our dining and retail also get a lot of feedback that we're usually looking at there. And then the other piece of data that we've started to integrate more fully are reviews on social media sites. So, what comments are we getting on Google reviews, travel for us, Yelp or Travel Advisor, and then, what are guests saying, commenting on social media posts. So we really integrate with our communications team to ensure that we're capturing those things and looking at them kind of holistically across the board.
One of the things you mentioned there was to do with the messaging of conservation. Do you ever feel there's pushback from the organization from a mission point of view, like justifying the hospitality side of it?
Mm. There's a need to keep or to stay balanced because we have a we have an obligation to the animals who live on our campuses that we are providing them the best well-being, the best care, um, providing them with opportunities that are great. Um, and where some of um, that tension can come in is balancing the guest expectation
Mhm.
because historically zoos did not always have the best welfare for animals that lived there, but they provided great entertainment experiences. And so some guests grew up with a certain expectation of what a zoo experience is like. If I walk by a certain habitat, I want to see that animal right there. Maybe I want to see 4 or 5 of them, right? I want them to be visible. I want them to be doing something. So there is an underlying guest expectation that sometimes can kind of run up against the animal welfare goals that we have on campus. Um, Now, the nice thing is that a lot of our guests want animals to have great welfare too, right? They are not coming to the zoo to see um, an animal perform, right? They want to ensure that the animals who they are viewing do have great well-being, are well taken care of, have great health. And part of that, shift has been zoos give animals a lot more choice. They don't necessarily have to be on view. They don't necessarily have to be really close. We've worked to increase the size of the habitats, the diversity of kind of plant life or places where animals can go and rest and take a minute to not be on view. Um, you know, Animals can make those choices as part of that um, experience and ensuring their well-being. And it means that there is some shifting that we have to do on our side to better prepare guests for that experience. We still want them to have a great experience, and we want that to live in concert with the great welfare that we're providing for the animals who live here too.
Yeah, I think personally, it's such a better experience seeing an animal in their what feels like a natural environment. Like
Mhm.
it's not many years ago, 100 years ago, you'd have these concrete boxes where you're seeing the animal, but now it puts it in the context of the environment, the ecology.
Mhm.
When you look at an exhibit and you feel almost like there's no glass there. You feel like that the theming goes right into the exhibition, and you see the animal sort of in its natural environment. I think it feels more magical. It's the experience that I'm always craving when I visit like a zoo or an aquarium.
Yeah, and for me, one of the really neat things is then you actually get to see animals displaying their natural behaviors as well. So we actually have the Center for Zoo and Aquarium Animal Welfare and Ethics group as part of the Detroit Zoological Society. And so that team conducts research and makes observations. And we do that to ensure that we are providing the best experience for those animals. And so part of that is seeing, are they behaving as an animal would in the wild? We like to see that behavior. We want to encourage that natural behavior here as well.
I think some leaders see hospitality as a maybe like a nice to have rather than a necessity. What's your response to this perspective? Like, how would you argue that hospitality is essential to long-term success?
I think hospitality is essential to ensuring that you have ongoing support of your community, of your guests, of your visitors, of the people who live in and around your institutions. We want to make sure that we're integrated, that we are providing a community service. And part of that is providing a great experience when you visit. So to me, it is essential for that long-term success to ensure that you're thriving beyond just today. We want to make sure that we're, in existence decades, centuries into the future. Um, we just had our 95th anniversary and, starting in that planning for that 100th anniversary and thinking about keeping an organization going for 100 years requires that buy-in, requires that you have people who want to keep coming back and want to keep supporting both the experience as well as the mission that you're moving forward.
100 years or so, it requires such organizational strength and robustness. I think that's what a lot of people often overlook with nonprofits, arts organizations, science museums, like anything like that. Like often these organizations, they have such a long history because they are robust and they do listen. When you compare that to, the average Fortune 500 company is under 20 years old.
That is wild to think about that contrast. Yeah.
What's one mistake you can see cultural organizations making when it comes to hospitality, and how can they course correct?
One of the challenges that sometimes comes up is how accessibility is viewed as a nice to have um, down the road. So when projects are getting planned, sometimes accessibility is that add-on thing at the end, and sometimes people think of it as something that can be cut. Um, One of the challenges is that in that you are making a decision and saying, we are intentionally not going to build something that every guest can participate in. And I challenge organizational leaders to really think about the statement that you're making when you are silently saying it, but you are still saying not every guest is important enough for us to have thought about how they were going to engage in this activity. Um, it is something that I know a lot of organizations often end up with one or two champions and they are able to make some changes. And then when those folks move on or move to other, um, other roles or other responsibilities, some of that can fall off again. And it really is something that you have to stay diligent about. You have to build it into your budget and into your planning, and you have to make sure that all of your designers who are on the project understand how important that is. It is something that can get overlooked or left behind, and unfortunately, it's a trend that I see come and go from different organizations, and it's really unfortunate because it's a really strong message that not everyone might realize they're putting out there when they make those decisions.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, and I think we can often see like accessibility, as you say, like this add-on, whereas really like it makes sense both ethically to make sure that you're giving everyone a chance to interact with your organization, and it also kind of makes sense financially. I think it can often be sort of like an uncomfortable thing to say as well, when you make this argument, but that's a huge portion of your audience, or your guests, your guests that come to your organization,
Mhm.
benefit from having accessibility. And so there's a return on investment argument that you can make as well.
Yeah. And I would also argue, if you're planning it early in the project, then it gets baked in, right? It's much lower to build things into a plan. I mentioned earlier how we did the accessibility review last year. And one of the things that we knew, right, old infrastructure, we don't have automatic door openers on all of our doors across our campus. Well, it costs a lot more to run that electricity, change the hinges on the doors so that, change out the doors so that they can have this accommodation, right? Adding in push buttons where they didn't exist before. Um, it's a large add-on, and so we are gradually, chipping away at addressing our campus, but we're saying every single new door that we are planning better have it built in, right? It is much easier to run the electric out there before you put up the walls, and so we are making sure that those things are built in so that we're not coming back afterwards and having to correct previous gaps.
Yeah, and I think that also points to another thing with accessibility is people often think it's an all or nothing thing. It's like, oh, well, we can't be accessible in this, 75-year-old exhibit, right? That's because it wasn't thought about at the time. So we don't do any of the accessibility. Whereas I think you're making a really good argument for like, hey, do everything you can to help
Mhm.
with accessibility.
Yep.
Yeah. One thing we hear from marketers when we're talking about hospitality is that it doesn't have much to do with them. But from the outside looking in, there's actually quite a lot of overlap between marketing and guest experiences. Like people are interacting with your marketing first and then going to the organization. But really, that's kind of a seamless sort of journey that people are taking. That's your first interaction, is maybe before you're even in the parking lot of the zoo. Um, what's your perspective? How do these two functions work together at Detroit Zoo?
Marketing is essential and critical, I would say, to hospitality. I think at the baseline level, they set expectations. So what you are showing or choosing to highlight within a marketing campaign is going to be a guest's assumption of what they're going to encounter when they get there. Um, I will say historically, we've worked really closely with our marketing team over various years and various campaigns, and it can be a challenge. I'll say, particularly at a zoo, because there are certain animals who might get more clicks, might be more eye-catching, but maybe they're not visible during a certain time of year, again, because of choice, because of animal welfare. And so we have to work really closely with our team to ensure that we're not setting up a false guest expectation. Um, we don't want to publicize a big photo of a polar bear when it's denning season and the female is going to be, behind the scenes. We have one male in a really large habitat, which is spectacular. But we don't want to set you up to think this is going to be your one big experience of the day, right? For us, maybe a better thing to highlight then in that particular instance are the penguins, because you can get right up to the glass. They're really visible all year round. And so we try and shift our marketing efforts to align with what the guest expectation should be during that time of year. During the winter, we will highlight animals who are playing in the snow. So we have river otters or wolverines, who are great outdoor snow animals. And we want to highlight our indoor experiences where you can be warm. We have a walk through butterfly garden and free flight aviary, our National Amphibian Conservation Center. Those are places that you can come to and actually have a really great indoor winter experience as well. So we're able to leverage off of each other, but only through really clear communication. So we want to make sure that we are communicating those things. We do a similar thing when we're marketing our events, um, ensuring what are going to be the things that people are actually doing. We also work closely the last year. I will say we've moved more into leveraging our guest feedback surveys to help drive our marketing for the coming year. So one of the things is we have a 21 plus series where it's a 4 event throughout the year, evening adult only uh, drinking event. So we have Zoo Brew is coming up next, and then Spooky Spirits is our fall one that overlaps with Halloween displays that we have. We have polar beers in the winter that overlaps with our Wild Lights holiday light display. Um, and we went back to our guest feedback surveys, and one of the top things that those guests said they enjoyed was seeing animals. And we weren't really highlighting in our marketing efforts that you can see animals when you come to these events. We had been highlighting, right, drink variety, you know, uh, additional like yard games and that kind of thing. We haven't gotten rid of that, but we've shifted so that um, we also highlight you have access to the zoo's campus, during Zoo Brew. You can walk around with a beer and watch the camels in the field. You can go back and see the polar bears. So we wanted to ensure that we're kind of working in lockstep with one another, so that the marketing team has the information that they need to be able to move forward and do that as well.
Yeah. It's such a good example of like listening properly to what your audience is saying as well, and not going with like what you initially think is the guest experience,
Mhm.
like they'll like this because there's lots of drinks. Well, you can get lots of drinks at a bar. Like the big thing is you're seeing it in the context of all these incredible animals.
Mhm.
It feels like there's lots of communication at Detroit Zoological Society. Like there's less silos, or at least you're trying to break down those silos between all these different departments.
It is an ongoing effort.
Of course, yeah,
I think for every organization, right, figuring out where the silos have existed. We have had silos for years, and we probably, in some sense, we still do. Depending on what we're addressing, but we have worked diligently and very intentionally to try to break some of those things down to ensure that we're able to move forward in the best direction together. We never want to be undercutting each other's efforts because ultimately we do all have the same goal. Um, And for us, especially, and for many organizations, right? Each one of us needs to have a seat at the table because we are representing a different perspective. So when I'm sitting at the table, I am much more focused on the guest experience than I am on animal well-being. It doesn't mean I'm discounting it, right? It doesn't mean that I'm operating without thinking about it. But it means that I'm sitting at the table with that perspective so that when, our head um, of animal research is there, she can be sharing her perspective and we can come together, on what the best solution is.
It's not a case of conflict of like this is my opinion that needs to go. It's about all about listening and like it's about illuminating rather than fighting between two different departments.
Yeah, and for us, especially in our event planning, one of the big changes that we've made in the last 2 years is just making sure that we're doing pre-meetings with everybody on campus who wants to attend from the various departments so that the landscape team knows what's coming up. The maintenance techs know what's coming up, but also our animal curators know we're going to be driving through the zoo with pieces and parts of dinosaurs and then assembling them. Well, there's going to be heavy equipment, going by just certain habitats, and we want to make sure that they're really clued in on that. We also have this attractions trail that this summer is going to have dragons in it, animatronic dragons, and mythical creatures. And, we will invite our animal teams to come out and we do sound monitoring with them. So any of the habitats that are close to that footprint, we make sure that they're included in part of that process in the angling of our speakers, in motion, if there's going to be anything that can be visible from outside of that footprint. We want to make sure that, again, we're working together so that we aren't kind of fighting against each other's goals so that we can all get to the same ultimate end goal, fulfilling our
Mhm.
mission together.
So, how do you think audience expectations around hospitality will evolve in the next 5 years? And how should arts and culture leaders prepare?
One of the things that I think has been growing, and I don't think that we've fully tackled it yet, is the idea of how much of an individualized experience do guests want? It is something that, I feel like within the last decade has really popped up a lot of, oh, you can customize your phone. Are we used to social media, catering your reels, your For You page? Um, how much are people expecting that the world around them reflects their own desires in that moment and um, kind of in life? How much does it cater to what they're expecting? um, I know they're kind of on the negative side of things, right? People are like, well, that does that just develop an echo chamber? And how much can you experience new things? And one of our goals is that you do experience new things when you come to the zoo, or come to the nature center. One of the places where we have had that discussion on our campuses is last year we added a new Detroit Zoo app. And our app enables you to pre-plan your visit, build out and save which animals do you want to see, um, which restaurant maybe do you want to go to for lunch. And then on the app itself, you then have a layer that kind of you've built your journey. Um, when we were talking about this, the question came up, are we expecting guests to all have the app on their individual device? Well, no, because we kind of want your group to stay together, right? We don't want everyone in your party to break off and have your own experience. And then, because much of kind of some of that connection building or storytelling later is that you're having these experiences together. So we are hoping that as a family or as a visiting group, you're sitting down and you're building out that experience before you come. I don't think we've figured out what that's going to be, but I think it's something we need to continue to tackle, um, and continue to listen to guests when they're experiencing these things to find out how much was it actually important? How much did it enable you to enjoy the experience more? Or did it even isolate you from
It
people around
distracts,
you?
yeah.
Hmm.
It's such an interesting nuance because I would automatically think that customization is better and personalization is better. But really, when you go to a performance or you go to an exhibit, the first thing you see when you see something amazing is you look to the person next to you. When you see like I remember seeing the cheetahs at Chester Zoo, like they were lazy for the whole day, and suddenly something got them. They all sprinted towards the door. And one of those things you do, you don't look at that and then log it on your in your diary. You know, you look to the person next to you and say, you know, did you see that? You know, the first thing you do at a comedy show when you laugh is you look at the person who you're with to laugh with. And that's not personalization. That's about the community. You know, that's about the experience that you have with people at an organization, at a performance.
Yeah, and especially in the zoo environment, we are trying to build empathy for animals in a variety of ways. And one of the best ways to do that is to have guests share their own experiences with one another. So you are highly likely you might have someone in your visiting group who is uncomfortable around snakes,
Mhm.
and you might not feel comfortable, right, going up to a snake habitat yourself. But you might enter that building because your whole group is going in. And then maybe they'll share, oh, I actually had a garter snake that lived in my backyard. Um, it was really neat for this reason. I saw it sunning itself on a rock one morning, and starting to tell those stories and build past some discomfort that someone may initially say, "Oh, no, I actually don't want to go, near. I don't want to be exposed to certain animals or certain things." And really being in that visiting group can help expand that, and help expand someone's thinking around those animals as well.
Wow, I love that. One of my favorite things at zoos is listening to a random kid tell me a fact about an animal. I think kids want to share, you know, naturally. I think they don't have the sort of blockers on that adults sometimes have of like, oh, I don't necessarily want to share this with this other person. They want to tell you the fact about the smoky jungle frog or something, you know?
Yeah, and sometimes they're amazingly fun, and I didn't know them myself either.
Yeah.
My background is not in animal care or zoology, and so it can be really fun to go out around campus and see what are people really connecting to that day. What did they know before they came? What are they finding out while they're here? And then later finding out, what is it inspiring them to pursue after they leave our campus too.
Hmm. If an organization wants to improve its visitor experience but doesn't necessarily know where to start, what's one small step they could take today?
I think the first step is asking what needs to be improved. So figuring out where you should actually be focusing your time, effort, and energy, um, to me is the baseline, is to get that initial feedback. And it doesn't mean that you have to initially do a full survey of everyone who's come to your organization in the last year, right? One of the things that we did when we were starting to work on our campus navigation project was I just did a survey of our frontline staff. I said, where do people ask you to go to first? Like, where are they trying to get to um, when they enter the campus? And we were able to get a great initial baseline for us to then start, digging into so that we can ask further guest questions. Um, but that was kind of we had data that we just had never compiled. And that really enabled us to get a head start on some things before we could launch into a full survey or full data collection around that.
Absolutely. It really reminds me how often we've had the conversation with marketers about, hey, talk to your box office staff because they are the people who are seeing the guests first. They're seeing your patrons first. They get all the questions that you've never even thought would be possible to ask or you thought had an obvious answer.
Yep. Yeah, that and I'll say our call center staff too. And I think for box office, when you're saying, maybe serve as both, that's the other place that we really tap into. What questions are people calling and asking about? Because that means they have taken the time to find a phone number, dial it, and they really want to talk to a person and find out this answer. And that means that they've hit other barriers, right? That it isn't obvious on the website. It isn't obvious, through other communication methods that we use. So we want to make sure that we're capturing those things as well.
If you could broadcast one message to executive directors, leadership teams, staff, and boards of thousands of arts and culture and exhibition based organizations, what would it be?
Please don't forget the people. I think the big thing is, right, making sure that you remember that why we continue to be able to operate is because people are coming to visit us. People are coming through our doors, people are supporting us. Um, and to know that when a guest is asking for something or getting clarification or needing assistance, we are here for them. And so ensuring that we are providing that support and thinking through and really addressing the concerns that exist um, because we wouldn't exist without them.
Amazing. I love that. Whenever I go to a zoo, one of the first places I look for on the map is the reptile enclosure or the reptile exhibits. What's one of your favorite exhibits at the zoo that all of our listeners should go and see?
My favorite place to take a little escape when I'm at the Detroit Zoo is our free flight aviary. It is a walkthrough experience where birds are free to fly all around you. It has two-story glass enclosure and tons of plants. You feel like you were completely transformed to a jungle forest, and you hear bird calls, bird songs, and then you start to see them. And that is one of the parts that I actually love about it is you have to slow down to be able to see all of the birds that live inside of there because they blend in or they're up high, some are up down low, um, moving around. And so it really slows you down in a way that um, I find I love. I love to be able to slow down and kind of escape time a little bit
Mm.
in there.
Emily, thank you so much for being here. I've loved this conversation.
Thank you so much, Dan. I appreciate you having me.